Okay, so you're here because you want to get to the heart of it. You want to understand these really complicated global issues, right?
That's right.
And you want to do it quickly but thoroughly.
Absolutely.
That is what we are all about here.
Yes.
And so today we're going to be diving deep into a new report that comes to us from a collaboration between Nigeria's National Institute of Security Studies and the UNODC.
Yes, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime.
And this report really pulls back the curtain on, I think, what is a really significant and evolving challenge facing Nigeria.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. And I think, for anybody who follows, global events, it's pretty clear that, Nigeria is an incredibly significant country on the African continent.
Oh, yeah, the most populous.
The most populous and a really key player in, kind of regional dynamics.
For sure.
And, this report really highlights the serious threats to peace and security that it faces.
Yeah, I mean, and we hear about this stuff all the time, right? Like we hear about the struggles with poverty and, various non-state armed groups operating in different regions.
For sure.
And even the increasing pressures of climate change. Mm-hmm. But what this report does is it kind of shines a laser focus on, I think, another really powerful engine of instability.
Yeah.
Which is, the increasing sophistication and violence of organized crime.
Yes, within Nigeria's borders.
Yes.
So, really looking internally.
Exactly. And it is not pretty.
No, it's not.
So this report is titled Organized Crime in Nigeria, a Threat Assessment. And it tackles a pretty wide spectrum of illicit activities.
Yes, it does.
It talks about everything from, how cults can become intertwined with crime to the changing face of maritime offenses. Like we always hear about piracy.
Right.
But it seems that that's changing quite a bit.
It's evolving, yeah.
And of course, the persistent challenges of drug trafficking and the, alarming rise of illegal trade in wildlife and in human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our mission today is to really try to distill the core insights from this really substantial body of work.
Yeah.
What are the fundamental drivers that are fueling this? What are the specific ways that organized crime is actually manifesting?
Yeah.
And then what are the, the tangible real world consequences we need to be aware of?
Yeah. Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit. So Nigeria, the report suggests that it's particularly susceptible to organized crime. They even use the term fertile ground.
Right.
It's not just bad luck, is it? Like, what are the specific factors that make it such an attractive environment for these activities?
Yeah, I think the report points to a really potent mix of kind of geographical advantages for these groups, but also socioeconomic vulnerabilities that really make it appealing.
Right.
So, you think about Nigeria's location and I've heard it described as like, this is Grand Central Station for illicit trade across continents, right?
Yeah.
It's this strategically, positioned country right along, major global shipping lanes connecting the Americas in Europe, Asia. It's not just a stop. It's like a crucial interchange point where different criminal networks can intersect.
Right.
And potentially collaborate.
Right. And exchange, their
expertise.
Their expertise. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's just geographically, right? And then you add to that the extensive transport infrastructure that's in place.
Yeah.
The challenge of, policing these long, porous borders.
Sure.
And, you've got a landscape that's ripe for exploitation.
Right.
By criminal organizations.
And particularly those who are moving, illicit goods and people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it makes sense from like a purely logistical point of view. But the report also really emphasizes, I think, some of the internal vulnerabilities, almost like, a weakness within the social fabric itself.
Exactly.
So what is it about kind of the internal situation in Nigeria that makes it, more susceptible to these kinds of activities?
So, the report doesn't pull any punches, right? It really lays out this stark reality of widespread youth unemployment,
right,
and what's known as multidimensional poverty.
Right.
So this is, poverty that encompasses not just a lack of income,
right,
but also limited access to healthcare, education, basic services.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, it creates this large pool of individuals who might see, criminal enterprises as offering,
a way out,
a viable, albeit incredibly dangerous path to earning a living.
Right. Yeah. The options are limited.
Yeah. And on top of that, the report highlights these governance gaps.
Okay.
So, regions where state authority may be weaker or less consistently applied.
Sure.
And you couple that with the presence of valuable natural resources, often in remote or less regulated areas, and that creates this powerful lure
Oh, yeah.
for illegal extraction and trade with criminal groups eager to fill that void.
Right, because if the government is not able to kind of exert its authority there,
Then somebody's going to step in.
Someone is going to come in and do, and profit from that.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's this really unfortunate convergence of strategic geography, deep economic hardship, and challenges in governance that essentially sets the stage.
It does.
Now, let's delve into the specifics of what this organized crime actually looks like in practice.
Okay.
The report begins by discussing cults.
Yeah.
Which, might not be the first thing that comes to mind for many people when they think about organized crime.
Yeah, I think that's a critical distinction that the report makes.
Okay.
While cults may not be inherently criminal in their initial structure or stated aims, they often evolve to become really significant enablers for a wide array of illegal activities.
Right. So they're not necessarily, forming with the intent to do criminal activity, but it sort of arises.
Right. They kind of morph.
They morph into that, right?
Yeah. And it's because, they have these established hierarchies and a capacity for collective violence, which becomes a really potent tool in the hands of criminal elements.
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting because, we often think of, criminal organizations, like the mafia in the U.S., as having a very strict hierarchy and very, clear lines of authority. And it seems like this is something that's kind of already built in.
Yeah, it's ready-made.
It's already ready-made for them.
It's ready to go, yeah.
Okay.
And I think the report reveals this chilling symbiosis where, the brute force of these cults fills this governance vacuum in certain areas.
Right.
And it essentially becomes like a shadow regulatory force in the underworld.
Oh, wow.
And exerts influence even on legitimate politics.
Wow. Okay, so they are actually using this not just to, make money illegally, but also to influence the political system.
Right.
So how do they wield this influence? Like, what kind of criminal activities are we talking about here specifically?
Well, so the report details how cults actively employ violence for extortion, essentially acting as protection rackets against businesses operating within territories that they claim as their own.
Oh, wow. So they're saying this is our territory.
Right.
You have to pay us.
You got to pay up.
Or else.
And we actually have a quote from a cult member that I think illustrates this perfectly. It says, "We are not government workers and have no salaries to depend on other than our cult activities.
Right.
We approach clubs and bars operating within our territories to make demands.
Okay.
When they fail to attend to those demands, then we attack and rob the place."
Oh.
So it's very direct.
Yeah.
Very brutal.
And there's no kind of, pretending it's anything other than what it is.
No. It's very straightforward.
Yeah.
This is how we make our money.
This is how we eat.
Right.
Wow. And it's not just about local businesses, is it?
No.
The report also highlights this, I think, deeply troubling connection between these cults and the political landscape.
Yes. And this is, I think, a particularly concerning aspect of this. The report presents allegations of politicians and even traditional rulers exploiting cult members for their own political objectives.
Right.
Especially around election periods.
Wow. So they're using them as like
enforcers
to disrupt elections, essentially.
Exactly.
Wow.
And, this can reportedly include, the violent disruption of the electoral process.
Sure.
Ranging from theft of ballot boxes to outright intimidation and even assassinations.
Wow.
And all this is in exchange for, resources like guns and ammunition.
Right. So they're being given the tools to carry out this violence, which then, of course, further empowers them in their criminal endeavors.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle.
Wow.
Yeah.
And another quote that really stood out to me from a cult member really illustrates this. He says, "They buy us guns and bullets to ensure we disrupt the election process and to also kill no matter who is involved so that our own candidate can win the election."
That's chilling. And it really does, I think, paint this disturbing picture of organized crime directly undermining democratic processes.
Absolutely.
So this is not just about, profiting from illegal activities. This is about really changing the face of the country.
Right. It's about wielding power.
It's about wielding power. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Moving on, the report also examines maritime crime.
Okay.
And, we often hear the term piracy.
Right. The catch-all term.
But it seems like the nature of these offenses is shifting.
It's definitely evolving.
Oh.
The report indicates that, these maritime criminal groups, often still referred to as pirates, are constantly adapting their methods in response to, increased law enforcement efforts in the Gulf of Guinea.
Sure.
They're also, strategically seeking out, more profitable illicit activities.
Right.
So we've observed this move away from kind of the more traditional robberies, targeting ship stores, the crew's personal belongings, towards this much more lucrative and sadly, increasingly common practice, which is the kidnapping of crew members for ransom.
Right. So instead of just, stealing whatever's on board, they're taking the people and then demanding money to get them back.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
And kidnapping, it seems like this is a recurring and escalating threat across various forms of organized crime in Nigeria.
It really is.
The report specifically mentions how it's become a major security concern, even referencing the devastating example of the Chibok girls' abduction.
Right. And I think, the sheer scale and frequency of kidnapping incidents, including these horrific large-scale abductions, have increased dramatically.
And this is about, generating income for these criminal organizations, right?
Right. That is a primary driver for sure.
But it's also about, creating this atmosphere of fear and instability.
It has a profound and devastating impact on individuals, families, and entire communities. These aren't just statistics. These are lives that are irrevocably altered, families torn apart, and communities living in constant fear.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking.
It is.
And then we have kind of the, I guess, more traditional image of organized crime, which is drug trafficking.
Okay.
So what insights does the report offer into Nigeria's role within that, global illicit trade?
So the report confirms that Nigeria remains a significant hub in the transnational trafficking of cocaine and heroin.
Right.
And, its geographical position, which we discussed earlier,
Yeah, it's right there.
is particularly relevant here.
Yeah.
Making it this crucial transit point for these illicit substances as they move between continents.
Right. It's like that stopping point for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the report also sheds light on Nigeria's growing involvement in a different type of illegal trade,
Okay.
which is wildlife and forestry crime.
Right.
And this is something that, I think a lot of people, when they think about organized crime, they don't necessarily think about this.
Right. And that's precisely why it's such a concerning development.
Right.
Nigeria has emerged as both a source country and a major transit hub for the illegal extraction and trafficking of this diverse range of wildlife and forestry products.
So it's both coming from within Nigeria and passing through Nigeria.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And what kind of things are we talking about specifically?
Well, the report, highlights high-value items like ivory,
Okay.
the highly sought-after pangolin,
Okay.
prized for its scales,
Right.
and rosewood,
Okay.
which is a valuable timber species
Sure.
that's facing intense illegal logging pressure.
Right. And so they're being, taken from Nigeria and then shipped all over the world.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think, this diversification of criminal activities really underscores the adaptability of these networks.
Right.
And, the increasing global demand for these illicit natural resources.
Right. So as long as there's demand, they will find a way to supply it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Supply and demand.
And then tragically, the report also emphasizes the persistent and horrific problem of trafficking in persons,
Yes.
which is a crime that carries with it, just immense human suffering.
Absolutely. And tragically,
Right.
trafficking in persons continues to be a major criminal market within Nigeria.
Yeah.
And the report, rightly stresses the immense physical and psychological damage
Of course.
inflicted on its victims,
Right.
the vast majority of whom are Nigerian women and children.
Oh, wow.
And what's particularly disturbing is this kind of identified shift towards internal and regional trafficking networks.
Okay.
So while, we still see Nigerian victims being rescued in Europe and the Americas,
Right.
there's this growing trend of exploitation occurring within Nigeria itself and in neighboring countries.
So they're not even having to go outside the country to do this.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
And primarily this is for, sexual exploitation, forced labor, or domestic servitude.
Oh, wow.
And then, the fact that Nigerian victims are also increasingly being identified in the Middle East and Asia.
Oh, wow. So this is really widespread.
It is. It really points to the extensive reach of these criminal operations.
This is not just a local problem. This is a global problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then finally, the report addresses migrant smuggling.
Okay.
And even though the number of Nigerians attempting to migrate, has maybe fluctuated in recent years,
Right.
it appears that those who do often find themselves vulnerable to criminal elements.
Yeah, I mean, the report does note, a significant decrease in the number of Nigerian migrants between 2019 and 2021.
Okay.
However, For those who do choose to undertake these often perilous journeys,
Right.
frequently driven by, a lack of legal pathways or the necessary travel documents,
Sure.
reliance on smugglers becomes almost unavoidable.
Yeah.
And what's, I think, crucial to recognize is the deep involvement of Nigerian nationals at every stage of this illicit process.
Right.
So from the initial recruitment of individuals within Nigeria
Okay.
to acting as the smugglers themselves during these often dangerous journeys.
Yeah.
And even as the receivers in the destination countries.
Wow.
So, it really highlights how deeply embedded these networks are.
Right. So these are not just, small groups of people. These are large, sophisticated networks.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So what we're seeing is this incredibly complex web of criminal activities,
Right.
each with its own unique characteristics and devastating consequences.
Yeah.
And it's easy to feel, I think, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it.
Right.
What kind of broader impact does all of this have, not just within Nigeria, but on the global stage?
Well, the report doesn't shy away from underscoring the profound and far-reaching consequences.
Right.
And as Gadawali, the UNODC executive director, so powerfully articulated,
Okay.
organized crime imperils global peace and security, undermines sustainable development, and violates and impedes human rights.
Wow.
So it's a stark reminder that these aren't isolated criminal acts.
Right.
They have significant ripple effects.
Yeah.
On regional stability, they hinder economic progress, and they fundamentally erode basic human rights across the globe.
Right. So this is not something that we can just kind of ignore
No.
and hope that it goes away. This is something that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
So given the seriousness of the situation, the report also touches on potential avenues for addressing these challenges.
Yeah.
It makes reference to the UNODC's Organized Crime Strategy Toolkit.
Right.
What kind of overarching approach does that framework suggest?
So the toolkit provides a really comprehensive 4-pillar strategy
Okay.
designed to counter organized crime.
Effectively.
Okay, so 4 pillars.
4 pillars, yeah.
What are they?
So these pillars are prevent, pursue, protect, and promote.
Okay.
So the prevent pillar focuses on, tackling the underlying factors that make individuals and communities vulnerable to crime.
So getting at the root of the problem.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, things like lack of economic opportunities, high rates of youth unemployment, widespread multidimensional poverty, the corrosive effects of corruption. Right. So essentially addressing the fertile ground that we talked about earlier.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So then pursue emphasizes the critical need to strengthen law enforcement agencies and the judicial system
Right.
to effectively investigate and prosecute criminal organizations holding perpetrators accountable.
So going after the criminals themselves.
Right.
Okay.
Protect centers on safeguarding vulnerable individuals and communities who are at risk of being exploited by organized crime.
Okay.
So including victims of trafficking and, those susceptible to recruitment.
Right. So trying to prevent them from falling victim in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then finally, promote highlights the indispensable role of international cooperation
Okay.
and the sharing of best practices among nations to combat these transnational threats.
Right. So we all have to work together.
Yeah, it's a global problem.
Okay. So it's a multi-pronged strategy, acknowledging that there's no single simple solution.
No silver bullet.
It requires a simultaneous effort to address the root causes while also bolstering the capacity to effectively respond to criminal activity when it occurs.
Exactly.
So prevention and enforcement.
Right. Yeah, we have to do both.
Okay. And this is something that I think, is going to require a lot of cooperation, not just within Nigeria, but from the international community as well.
Absolutely. And, I think A.S. Adeleke, the head of Nigeria's National Institute of Security Studies, really aptly stated this. He said, by dedicating our collective talent, energy, and resources to this task, we can defeat the scourge of organized crime and give Nigeria the prosperous future it deserves.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement.
It is.
And it really speaks to, I think, the importance of having this coordinated action at all levels.
Right, from the local to the national and even the international.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a global problem. It requires a global solution.
Good to.
So I think the key takeaway here is that organized crime in Nigeria is deeply complex and constantly evolving.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's not a monolithic entity. It's this intricate web of interconnected illicit activities.
Exactly.
All fueled by this combination of local vulnerabilities and global dynamics.
Right.
And it has serious and far-reaching consequences for the people of Nigeria and for international peace and security as a whole.
Absolutely.
And so, I think reflecting on this, it really prompts us to consider the intricate ways in which global challenges are interconnected.
Yeah.
How do factors like economic inequality on a global scale and complex geopolitical dynamics inadvertently create openings for these sophisticated criminal enterprises to thrive and expand? What is the true impact and effectiveness of international cooperation in tackling these deeply entrenched challenges?
Right.
And perhaps most fundamentally, as we consider the UNODC's comprehensive framework, prevent, pursue, protect, promote,
Right.
it encourages us to think critically about which of these interconnected areas might offer the most promising pathways toward achieving sustainable and lasting solutions in a nation as vital as Nigeria.
Yeah. I think that's a great point to end on.
Okay.
It's a call to action for all of us.